Hi, this is Allison Satoff with Art for Elementary School Teachers. Today we are making a Zentangle landscape. You have to start by drawing a landscape. You want to keep it nice and simple. You want to include a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. In a landscape or any picture, the background typically would be lighter, softer, duller, less detail, and smaller. The foreground would be bigger, more detail, more vibrant colors. The middle ground just falls between the background and the foreground. Once you have drawn your landscape with a pencil lightly, go over it with a black Sharpie. Your landscape should be nice and simple. You don't have to overcomplicate it. Just make sure it has a foreground, middle ground, and a background. When you're done drawing and you've traced over it with a Sharpie, then you're gonna start adding some Zentangles. Zentangles are just simply a line or a shape that is repeated over and over again. When you do the Zentangle patterns, you're going to use any kind of water-based markers because we're going to add water. We want it to spread out and bleed. So you can get on the internet and look at Zentangle patterns to give you ideas. This is the water part, so I'm just going to lay this drawing on top of my scrap paper, and I'm going to start adding some kind of Zentangle pattern down here. It could simply be lines, so I'm just going to go follow this wave around. I'm going to repeat that same pattern over and over for this particular one. It's good to mix it up a little bit. It's good to have some lines that are really close together, some that are farther apart. It's good to have some lines that are thicker, some that are thinner. So you don't want them to all be the same. You want to vary it a little bit. So for this one, I'm going to change colors. I want it to still look like water, so here I used blue. Now I'm going to use turquoise. I'm just going to add a curve like this. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to a brighter blue. And I'm going to add a different detail to this space right here. Another variation would be curved lines as opposed to straight lines. So right here I'm going to draw all straight lines. I'm going to switch colors again. I think I'll use purple because you might see some purple in the water. And right here I'm just going to add dots. Now you have to draw and finish the entire picture. For me, I'm going to go ahead and show you the next step. So the next step would just be to take a glass of water and a paintbrush. You're going to add water to the spaces, but you want to keep the spaces separate. The marker is going to bleed out into these areas. It's going to work like watercolor. It's a really neat effect that you could do with a water-based marker. It's a little cleaner than actually getting out watercolor trays. If you apply a lot of water, then that area is going to look like a solid color. If you don't apply as much water, you'll still see your pattern showing through. One thing you don't want to do is just get your brush wet and paint over the whole thing. You want to treat each space like a separate space, and you want to keep them from bleeding together by not painting two spaces right beside each other. So you want to skip around on your picture. If you're not careful, it will all bleed together. So I'm going to go ahead and paint this section right here. I'm just adding some water, clean water. And I don't want to add too much water because I actually like the lines. I think the lines will look really pretty. Like I said, if you add too much water, then the lines will completely disappear. If you don't have a lot of time and you need to go ahead and paint two spaces right beside each other at the same time, just leave a dry gap in between them. So I'll go ahead and paint this one, but I'm just going to make sure that I leave a gap between this space and this space. It actually isn't going to matter as much down here because both spaces are blue, even though they're different shades of blue. If it was something like where you were painting the sky and the field, you would definitely want to leave a gap between those two spaces, just a dry strip of paper showing through. That way the two watercolor areas don't bleed together. Like I said, it doesn't matter quite as much when the two spaces right beside each other are the same color. This is one we did earlier. In the background I have the sun. In the middle ground I have the field and the barn. And I also have a row of trees back behind the barn. In the foreground I have rocks. So you can tell that I left a gap in between the field and the rocks. That way they didn't bleed together, because I did want to paint them all in one day just to get the project finished. So leaving a little gap is fine. Or you could paint this section, then this section, then this section, then this section. And that gives it a chance to dry before you move right on to the two spaces that are right beside each other. Okay, that's all. Get this finished up, put it in your binder, and write up a lesson plan. Your binders are due on December 6th.